The Battle of Cadzand in 1337, the engagement that professionalized English border garrison warfare, begins on a freezing November morning. 80 merchant cogs cut through the grey North Sea, their square sails snapping against the winter wind. This raid is no simple skirmish. It is a contract-based operation designed to dismantle the very foundations of the Valois crown. What unfolds on this marshy island will trigger a paranoid dissent within the French court, leading King Philip VI to execute his own nobles in a wave of terror. Manny orders the final approach. Why did the biological failure of a royal bloodline in 1328 necessitate a bloodbath on a forgotten Flemish island nearly a decade later? A young Edward III kneels on the cold stone of Amiens Cathedral, performing liege homage for Gascony to a man he considers a usurper. The French nobility revived ancient Salic Law specifically to bypass Edward's claim through his mother, Isabella. This legal maneuvering turned a dynastic dispute into an existential threat for the Plantagenet dynasty. The ritual of subordination only fuels the king's silent rage. How did the economic hunger of the Flemish textile industry transform a legal quarrel into a catalyst for total war? Heavy wool fleeces from English sheep are loaded onto pack horses, the golden thread that tethers the prosperity of Ghent and Bruges to London. Edward III realizes the embargo is more lethal than the blade, moving the wool staple to Mechlin to reward his allies and starve the supporters of Philip VI. This pressure forces the Count of Flanders into an impossible choice between feudal loyalty and industrial survival. The economic tension reaches a breaking point. What role did the exiled Robert of Artois play in pushing Edward to cross the threshold of open rebellion? Robert leans over a candlelit map in Westminster, whispering of French vulnerability and the cracks in Philip's noble alliances. When Philip demands Robert's extradition and confiscates Aquitaine, the diplomatic path collapses into a frenzy of military preparation. The English knights gather for the vow of the Heron, swearing to be the first to strike the French realm. The sound of hammers on hull timber signals the invasion's birth. Sir Walter Manny does not wait to be found. He finds the battle first and builds it to his advantage. Manny stands on the salt-sprayed deck of his flagship, his eyes tracking the shifting sandbanks of the Zwin estuary with a hunter's precision. He is the professional officer of a new age, a veteran of the Scottish borders who prioritizes logistics over chivalric grandstanding. As Admiral of the Northern Seas, he manages a fleet of requisitioned cogs with a mercenary's cold efficiency. He chooses the target that will hurt most. Why would a veteran commander select a desolate landscape of salt marshes and mudflats as his primary strategic objective? The low, featureless horizon of Cadzand appears through the morning mist, a landscape of tidal gullies and sea lavender. Manny knows the island is bait, guarding the golden inlet that leads to the wealthy markets of Bruges. By landing here, he forces the garrison of Sluys into a public dilemma that cannot be ignored. The proximity of the raid makes any French hesitation look like cowardice. The trap is meticulously set. How did the shifting geomorphology of the Zwin Inlet dictate the perilous movements of the English fleet during the approach? The deep draft cogs groan as they navigate the silting channels, their hulls narrowly clearing the sediment that has accumulated since the Great Storm of 1134. A single navigator's error could leave 3,700 men stranded on the intertidal flats, exposed to the French garrison. Manny's fleet maneuvers through the churning swell, positioning itself at the mouth of the estuary. The incoming tide provides the only window for a successful landing. What structural innovations allowed these common merchant cogs to be transformed into lethal fighting platforms for the Channel crossing? Carpenters hammer wooden fighting castles onto the prows and sterns of the round-hulled ships, creating elevated nests for the archers. These vessels, like the Cog Thomas, are stable enough to carry the weight of iron-shod men-at-arms into the shallows. Steering oars cut deep into the brackish water as the masters coordinate the final push toward the shore. The ships are no longer cargo carriers, but floating fortresses designed for a new style of war. How did a failed initial probe against the harbor of Sluys lead Manny to unleash a miniature chevauchée across the island? Thick smoke rises from burning thatched roofs of fishing villages as English sailors loot the winter stores of the Flemish peasantry. Repelled from the city's stone walls on November 9th, Manny turns his frustration into a calculated display of brutality. The screams of the local population are a visceral signal of power intended to goad the French commander into action. The baiting of the trap is now complete. The first volley of English arrows at Cadzand removes the Flemish commander's options in under 3 seconds. A storm of Bodkin-tipped arrows glints in the flat grey light, tracing a lethal arc from the ridge down to the mud-choked landing site. This is the moment the situational tension advances, proving the macro promise that professionalized archery can shatter the feudal order. Guy de Rickenburg commits his garrison to the Salt Meadows, exactly where Manny wants them. The tactical reality of the 14th century changes in a single breath. What internal pressure compelled Sir Guy de Rickenburg to abandon his fortifications and cross into Manny's killing zone? Guy stares from the ramparts of Sluys as the horizon glows with the fires of his brother's subjects, his grip tightening on the cold stone. As a knight of reputation, he cannot endure the shame of inaction, while the English pillage with impunity. He gathers thousands of men-at-arms and local levies, boarding the transport boats with a false sense of security. He expects a traditional clash of nobility, not a professionalized massacre. How did Manny utilize the treacherous terrain of the Salt Meadows to maximize the effectiveness of his 3,700 men? Dismounted men-at-arms form a solid wall of steel on the rising ground, while longbowmen are arrayed in a V-shaped hearse formation on the flanks. The mud is knee-deep and freezing, a physical barrier that slows the Flemish advance into a crawl. Manny waits until the enemy is mid-estuary, trapped between the rising tide and the ridge, before he gives the order to loose. The discipline of the English line is absolute and terrifying. What technical advantages allowed the English longbow to dominate the more sophisticated Flemish crossbow on the field of Cadzand? The longbowman lays his body into the yew-bow, pulling a draw weight of 150 pounds to launch a heavy arrow with devastating kinetic energy. While the Flemish crossbowmen struggle with slow mechanical windlasses, the English release 10 arrows per minute. The sound of the engagement is a persistent thrum of wood and gut, followed by the metallic ring of steel-piercing mail. The rate of fire creates a suppression zone that no armor can withstand. How did the mechanical collapse of the Flemish line demonstrate the obsolescence of traditional feudal charging tactics? Fallen horses and men-at-arms create a chaotic barrier in the mud, blocking the advance of the remaining ranks as the arrows continue to rain down. The Flemish line shatters under the psychological weight of the missile fire before they even reach the English lances. When the two forces finally clash, the English men-at-arms move forward with the rhythmic thud of polearms against bone. The garrison of Sluys is no longer an army, but a panicked mass. The English do not ransom the prisoners. They execute the economics of border warfare instead. The Salt Meadows are littered with discarded Pavese shields, their painted town crests sinking slowly into the October mud. While Guy de Rickenburg is spared for his high ransom value, the common Flemish rank and file are systematically put to the sword. This brutal distinction is the signature of a professionalized war that treats the common soldier as a logistical burden. Manny delivers the easy victory Edward required to secure his continental alliances. The strategic mechanism has functioned perfectly. What happened to the captured Guy de Rickenburg in the months following his humiliating defeat on the island? Guy sits at a lavish banquet in London, receiving gifts of fine horses and jewels from the very king who ordered his capture. Edward III uses the theatre of chivalry to flip the allegiance of his most influential prisoners. The ransom of £8,000 is paid and granted to Walter Manny as a reward for his tactical success. By 1340, Guy will fight for England at Sluys. The economy of war has achieved what the blade could not. How did the psychological shockwave of the defeat at Cadzand destabilize the internal politics of the County of Flanders? Wealthy weavers gather in the guild halls of Ghent, their faces illuminated by the flickering light as they debate a future without the Count. The failure to protect the island's inhabitants shatters the feudal contract and emboldens the urban communes. Jacob van Artevelde rises to power, leading a revolt that will eventually invite Edward to claim the French throne. The smoke from the raid has cleared, revealing a vacuum of power. Why did the news of a minor island skirmish trigger a wave of terror and executions across the French court? King Philip VI paces his chambers, his eyes clouded with a paranoid rage that demands the blood of supposed traitors within the Flemish towns. He cannot accept that his professional garrison was defeated by mere archers, assuming instead that internal treachery allowed the English victory. He orders the systematic execution of scores of officials, alienating the very allies he needs to maintain his northern borders. His fear creates the rebellion he sought to prevent. What was the strategic legacy of this raid in the context of the larger naval campaign that would culminate at Sluys? The grey light at the Zwin estuary now reflects the silhouettes of larger English fleets, their logistical paths cleared by the destruction of the Cadzand garrison. The raid served as a laboratory for the tactical revolution of the 100 Years' War, testing the coordination of requisitioned merchant cogs. It proved that a small, professionalized force could paralyze a feudal power through economic and psychological pressure. The Golden Inlet is now a gateway for invasion. Cadzand is forgotten by the chroniclers. The men it trained are not. The skeleton of an English soldier is excavated from the London Charterhouse, a lead papal seal resting in the coffin of Sir Walter Manny. This battle provided the blueprint for the victories at Crécy and Poitiers, establishing a military system that redefined European power for a century. Sir Walter Manny remained the king's foremost commander, using his war profits to found the monastery where he would eventually find his rest. Guy de Rickenborg defected to the English crown in 1340, serving his former captor at the Battle of Sluys. Which chapter of the 100 Years' War should we explore next? Hope this deep dive into the professionalized warfare of the 14th century helped. Your engagement helps us bring these forgotten battlefields and lost strategies back to life. Join the History Weaver community today to uncover the secrets of the Middle Ages. Scan now and ensure the next dispatch reaches you before the first arrows fly.